Alrighty, so today we're going to be doing the reading of Lamb to the Slaughter. So in order to access the text, you are going to need to go to CommonLit. And to log into CommonLit, you need to use your username and your password that we set up in class. If for some reason you forgot it, please just reach out to me and I can help you reset it. But if not, this will be assigned to you. And this will be a reading of it, which we will have already completed in class, but this video will allow you to go back and hear it read out loud, as well as some of the annotations we made, and then we'll help you with any of the future assignments. So this story is by Roald Dahl, who also wrote The Landlady, which we read earlier in this term. So Roald Dahl was a British novelist, a short story writer, and a poet. And as we know from The Landlady, he's well known for his unexpected endings and oftentimes darkly comic themes and twists. So in this short story, Dahl is going to be describing a woman's reaction when her husband comes home with surprising news. So in class, we talked about the title of this story, which is in fact what we call an allusion, ALLUSIONS, an allusion. And that means that it's a reference to something that is well known or a well known saying. So in this case, a lamb to the slaughter is referring to an innocent, pure figure, such as a lamb, that's being sent to a slaughter. So a slaughterhouse, as we talked about, is where unfortunately animals are killed. So lamb to the slaughter is when this pure, innocent figure is taken somewhere without their knowing. So a dark twist in terms of them not being prepared. So Lamb to the Slaughter is an allusion. So just keep that title in mind. We can kind of guess based on that title that the story is going to be a little dark. The story is going to be definitely mysterious. And again, we know Dahl and we know what his past story has been like. So in this lesson, I want you to think about what we have recently been talking about in class. So point of view, characterization, and most importantly, irony. So the three types of irony we've been focusing on, and we'll pause to annotate and talk as we read. The room was warm and clean, the curtains drawn, the two table lamps alight, hers and the one by the empty chair opposite. On the sideboard behind her, two tall glasses, soda water, whiskey, fresh ice cubes in the thermos bucket. Mary Maloney was waiting for her husband to come home from work. Now and again, she would glance up at the clock, but without anxiety, merely to please herself with the thought that each minute gone by made it nearer the time when he would come home. There was a slow, smiling air about her and about everything she did. The drop of a head as she bent over her sewing was curiously tranquil. Her skin, for this was her 6-month-old child, had acquired a wonderful translucent quality. The mouth was soft, and the eyes, with their new placid look, seemed larger, darker than before. When the clock said 10 minutes to 5, she began to listen, and a few moments later, punctually as always, she heard the tires on the gravel outside, and the car door slamming, the footsteps passing the window, the key turning in the lock. She set aside her sewing, stood up, and went forward to kiss him as he came in. So just to pause, our main character is Mary Maloney. So I'm going to highlight some information I learned about Mary within those first 3 paragraphs. So Mary's waiting for her husband to come home from work. And the mood that's being set in this paragraph is a very calm, relaxing, peaceful mood. She feels very at ease waiting for him to come home. It also lets her know that she's excited for him, that she's sitting there and she's glancing up at the clock, waiting for him to come home. So I'm going to put Mary is looking forward to her husband arriving home. Something that tells me that this is calm and this is peaceful and exciting for Mary is the idea that it's without anxiety, merely to please herself with the thought. So again, she's looking forward to him coming home. There's a slow, smiling air about her. And another reason for this slow, smiling air is we learn that in this paragraph that she is also 6 months pregnant. So she's pregnant. She's listening for him to come home, so that again shows her excitement. And again, we can figure out how peaceful and relaxing this is also based on this word here, that curiously tranquil. So tranquil, sorry, I want to make note of means peaceful, relaxing. So not only does she herself have this sense of peace and ease about her, the whole mood and situation and setting right now does. Even if we look back at the beginning, the room is warm and clean. The curtains drawn, the lights are on, she has drinks waiting to go. So everything is as it should be. It's peaceful and it's calm. And some would say that it's almost too calm. Hello, darling, she said. Hello, darling, he answered. She took his coat and hung it in the closet. Then she walked over and made the drinks, a strongish one for her, a weak one for him. And soon she was back again in her chair with the sewing, and he in the other, opposite, holding the tall glass with both hands, rocking it so the ice cubes tinkled against the side. For her, this was always a blissful time of day. So we can infer that blissful means to be happy, a happy, cheerful time of day. Because we know that she's been excited for him to come home, that she's been looking forward to this. So if this is a blissful time of day, if it's something that's filled with bliss, it's filled with happiness, it's filled with cheer. She knew he didn't want to speak much until after the first drink was finished, and she, on her side, was content to sit quietly and join his company after the long hours alone in the house. She loved to luxuriate in the presence of this man and to feel, almost as a sunbather feels in the sun, that warm male glow that came out of him to her when they were alone together. She loved him for the way he sat loosely in a chair, for the way he came in the door and moved slowly across the room with long strides. She loved the intent, far look in his eyes when they rested on her, the funny shape of his mouth, and especially the way he remained silent about his tiredness, sitting still with himself until the whiskey had taken some of it away. So this paragraph repeats a lot of this phrase towards the end of she loved him for the way he sat loosely, for the way he came in a door. She loved him for the intent, far look in his eyes. So we learn that Mary cares and loves her husband immensely. So truly in love with him. She loves little things about him, even just the way he's sitting there calmly and peacefully and in quiet. She loves the way he looks. So we have no doubt in our minds now that this woman does love her husband. She's been waiting for him to come home, and now they're finally together, and it's the best time of her day. She also compares him to something here. Back in this line, she says she loved to luxuriate in the presence of this man and to feel almost as a sunbather feels in the sun. So she's comparing herself to the sunbather and him to the sun, and herself to a sunbather. So without the sun, a sunbather wouldn't have much. They wouldn't be having the beautiful weather and the need to get, tan or colored in the sun as what sunbathers do. So without the sun, there's really no point in sunbathing. So she's saying her husband is her everything. He is her sun. He is what makes this world go round for her. And we can also figure that out too from all this she lists off about loving him. So he really is her everything. And not only does she love him, but if he's the sun, she's talking about how much she needs him too. We can also infer that this is the time where women are expected to really be at home, taking care of the house and taking care of their husbands. So she needs him. She relies on him not only for love, but for security. as you can tell from the beginning, she wasn't at work. She's at home taking care of the house. And when he comes in, she takes his coat and hangs it in the closet. Then she walked over and made the drinks. So, yes, this might be because she loves him, but this is taking place, and we can see this from up top in the 1950s when women were expected to be taking care of their house, their husbands, and their job was to really just be a housewife and have children. So, 1950s, women were housewives and expected to take care of homes, families. So these are her only expectations right now. Alrighty. Tired, darling? Yes, he said, I'm tired. And as he spoke, he did an unusual thing. He lifted his glass and drained it in one swallow, although there was still half of it, at least half of it left. She wasn't really watching him, but she knew what he had done because she heard the ice cubes falling back against the bottom of the empty glass when he lowered his arm. He paused a moment, leaning forward in the chair, then he got up and went slowly over to fetch himself another. So something interesting is going on here. Um, he's lifting his glass and draining it in a swallow. So I'm going to start highlighting some things about the husband in green because we're going to have a shift in the mood. So if you haven't noticed, that peacefulness has all of a sudden resorted to the husband draining his drink. The ice cubes are falling back, clinking against the bottom of the glass, letting us know that it's empty. And then he gets up and slowly goes over to fetch himself another drink. So the mood has started to shift, and I want you to pay attention as we read now what he continues to do. I'll get it, she cried, jumping up. Sit down, he said. When he came back, she noticed that the new drink was dark amber with the quantity of whiskey in it. Darling, shall I get your slippers? No. She watched him as he began to sip the dark yellow drink, and she could see little oily swirls in the liquid because it was so strong. So here he snaps at her when she offers to get him another drink. So probably not something she's used to. She never mentions, in her relationship being an issue with her husband. If anything, it's all about love and waiting for him to come home. So now he's being, very rude to her. And what does he do? He goes and he gets a new drink that is so dark because of the whiskey in it. Dark amber. Then she offers again, shall I get your slippers? No. And notices yet again, the new drink he has little oily swirls in the liquid because it's so strong. So that makes me think, why is he drinking so much right now? Why is he being short with her? Why is he drinking? Why is he not engaging with her? So the husband acting unusual, cold to her, so not very friendly. Seems to be that he's either in a bad mood or he's upset about something. So I'm going to say seems to be upset about something. He just come home from work, so we can maybe predict that something happened at work. He's snapping at her. So is there something going on with her that he's upset about? So we do need to notice, though, that that mood has changed from being peaceful and loving and happy to all of a sudden being unusual and intense and a little bit suspicious. I think it's a shame, she said, that when a policeman gets to be as senior as you, they keep him walking about on his feet all day long. So it's important to note he's a policeman. Put that in green for him. He didn't answer, so she bent her head again and went on with her sewing. But each time he lifted the drink to his lips, she heard the ice cubes clinking against the side of the glass. Darling, she said, would you like me to get you some cheese? I haven't made any supper because it's Thursday. No, he said. If you're too tired to eat out, she went on, it's still not too late. There's plenty of meat and stuff in the freezer, and you can have it right here and not even move out of the chair. Her eyes waited on him for an answer, a smile, a little nod, but he made no sign. Anyway, she went on, I'll see you get some cheese and crackers first. I don't want it, he said. She moved uneasily in the chair, the large eyes still watching his face. So if she's moving uneasily in the chair, we can tell that she's starting to get a little nervous. So Mary appears to be nervous or anxious, which is the exact opposite of how she felt in the beginning. So once again, that's telling us that clearly something is off. As a couple, they go out to eat on Thursdays, it mentioned, and he says, no, that's not happening. He doesn't want to go out. He doesn't even want her to get him something to eat after a long day of work. So again, not typical behavior. Clearly something is wrong. And Mary is starting to get a little nervous. She moved uneasily in the chair, the large eyes still watching his face. But you must eat. I'll fix it anyway, and then you can have it at not, as you like it. She stood up and placed her sewing on the table by the lamp. Sit down, he said, just for a minute, sit down. It wasn't till then that she began to get frightened. So I'm going to put that in yellow for Mary, similar to what we said up here. She lowered herself back into the chair, watching him all the time with those large, bewildered eyes. He had finished the second drink and was staring down into the glass, frowning. Listen, he said, I've got something to tell you. What is it, darling? What's the matter? He had now become absolutely motionless, and he had kept his head down so that the light from the lamp beside him fell across the upper part of his face, leaving his chin and mouth in shadow. She noticed there was a little muscle moving near the corner of his left eye. So this description here that Dahl gives us tells me that whatever he is about to say is not going to be good. So whatever he is about to say is going to be good. So if the lighting is falling across his face, so just the bottom half of his mouth is in shadow and the top part isn't, that darkness across his mouth tells me whatever is coming out of it is not going to be a positive thing. So even thinking about that in terms if it was a movie or a picture, the top part of his face is lit up, the bottom half is in shadow. And if we were kind of analyzing a film or a picture here, that shadow again would tell us whatever's coming out of the mouth from that shadow is not going to be good. Also, if his eye is twitching, the muscle moving near it, typically someone is going to be twitching if they're anxious or nervous or worried about something. And here it is telling us whatever he's going to say is something that he's either nervous to tell her or not proud of. This is going to be a bit of a shock to you, I'm afraid, he said, but I've thought a good deal about it, and I've decided the only thing to do is tell you right away. I hope you won't blame me too much. And he told her. It didn't take long, 4 or 5 minutes at most, and she sat very still through it all, watching him with a kind of dazed horror as he went further and further away from her with each word. So there it is, he added, and I know it's kind of a bad time to be telling you, but there simply wasn't any other way. Of course, I'll give you money and see you're looked after, but there needn't really be any fuss. I hope not, anyway. It wouldn't be very good for my job. So again, the author does something interesting here. He tells you that the husband is telling her something, but doesn't come right out and say this is the issue, this is what he said. We have to infer based on what information is given to us. So he tells her it's going to be a bit of a shock. So whatever he's about to say isn't going to be anything she's prepared for. And he's also hoping that she won't blame him too much. So something he's done is wrong, and he doesn't want blame for it. So it's not just going to be something light, it's something that's shocking that he doesn't want blame for. And that takes, 4 or 5 minutes to tell her. And she's watching this whole time, dazed horror as she went further and further away from her with each word. So this is going to go in yellow for Mary. And this is where we can infer that she is in some way lost her husband. She is shocked. She is far from him after what he has told her. And then he even goes on to say, it's a bad time, but there's no way. And this is where we can infer that it's possible that or certain that he is leaving her, because he says, I'll give you money and see that you're looked after. And don't forget what we mentioned before, that Mary very much relies on him, not just for, love and happiness, but for that security, for that money. And she's also pregnant, 6 months pregnant. And he's saying, you know what, I'm out, whether there be someone else or he's leaving her, he's gone. He also doesn't want her to make a fuss about it or really to let anyone know, which also makes me think that he's probably going to marry or be with someone else. And he doesn't want the blame, and he doesn't want anyone to know because it would look bad for his job. So here's where I'm going to make another comment and infer that her husband is leaving her for someone else. Because if he doesn't want people to judge him and he doesn't want the blame, it doesn't seem like it's just going to be he's leaving her, he's divorcing her. It seems like there's somebody else involved. So think about how you think Mary's going to react, knowing how much she loves him and relies on him. Think about your predictions. Her first instinct was not to believe any of it, to reject it all. It occurred to her that perhaps she hadn't even spoken, that she herself had imagined the whole thing. Maybe if she went about her business and acted as though she hadn't been listening, then later, when she sort of woke up again, she might find none of it had happened. So I'm going to make a note here that Mary is in complete shock by this. So she doesn't even believe it. She really doesn't even know what's going on. She just wants to reject it and pretend it didn't happen. I'll get the supper, she managed to whisper, and this time he didn't stop her. When she walked across the room, she couldn't feel her feet touching the floor. She couldn't feel anything at all. That in yellow. Actually, I'm going to put this in a different color. So this is Mary's reaction to what her husband has just told her. And this is important to think about, is she is not just like mad and screaming and angry yet. She's not even registering what he said. She's kind of in a trance. Everything was automatic now. So that again means she's not even thinking about what she's doing or saying. Down the steps to the cellar, the light switch, the deep freeze, the hand inside the cabinet taking hold of the first object it met. She lifted it out and looked at it. It was wrapped in paper, so she took off the paper and looked at it again. A leg of lamb. All right, they would have lamb for supper. She carried it upstairs, holding the thin bone end of it with both her hands, and she went through the living room. She saw him standing over by the window with his back, and she stopped. For God's sake, he said, hearing her but not turning around, don't make supper for me. I'm going out. At that point, Mary Maloney simply walked up behind him, and without any pauses, she swung the big frozen leg of lamb high in the air and brought it down as hard as she could on the back of his head. She might as well just have hit him with a steel club. She stepped back a pace, waiting, and the funny thing was that he remained standing there for at least 4 or 5 seconds, gently swaying. Then he crashed to the carpet. The violence of the crash, the noise, the small table overturning helped bring her out of the shock. She came out slowly, feeling cold and surprised, and she stood there for a while blinking at the body, still holding the ridiculous piece of meat tight with both hands. All right, she told herself, so I've killed him. So she uses the leg of lamb, hits him over the back of the head. And this is where I want people to think is this something she's thought about doing or something that just happens out of spite or out of shock? And we have some instances up here where we see what she's doing is her kind of in this trance. So I'm not going to convince you one way or another, but I want you to think about why she does what she does and why the author is having her take such a drastic measure. So after it happens, she still comes out of the shock slowly, feeling cold and blinking at the body, like she can't even believe what she's done. So again, a lot of people go through divorces or separations, unfortunately, or whatever it may be, and not many, some of course, not many end like this. So why is he having her take such a drastic measure in this story? What is she so It was extraordinary now how clear her mind became all of a sudden. She began thinking very fast. As the wife of a detective, she knew quite well what the penalty would be. That was fine. It made no difference to her. In fact, it would be a relief. On the other hand, what about the child? What were the laws about murderers with unborn children? Did they kill them both, mother and child, or did they wait until the 10th month? What did they do? So Mary starts thinking about the death penalty that she might be getting if they find out what she did, because her husband was a police officer. And her first response to that is that it's fine. It made no difference. It would be a relief. And this is important to note is that she's not even thinking her life is worth living without her husband. So she feels like life is not worth living without her husband. Feels like she has nothing, like she's lost everything. Because again, he was her son, he was her everything, not just for love, but also for security. So she's considering, like, what is my life even? Why would I even be alive anymore? And the only thing that's keeping her alive is the thought of this unborn child. And she doesn't know what would happen to the child if she were to be found guilty. So that's what keeps her going. And that's important to note. Mary Maloney didn't know, and she certainly wasn't prepared to take a chance. She carried the meat into the kitchen, placed it in a pan, turned the oven on high, and shoved it inside. Then she washed her hands and ran upstairs to the bedroom. She sat down before the mirror, tidied her hair, touched up her lips and face. She tried a smile. It came out rather peculiar. She tried again. Hello, Sam, she said brightly aloud. The voice sounded peculiar, too. I want some potatoes, please, Sam. Yes, and I think a can of peas. That was better. Both the smile and the voice were coming out better now. She rehearsed it several times more. Then she ran downstairs, took her coat, and went out the back door, down the garden, into the street. So she's acting a little bit unusual here. Nothing about this is something that one might do after their husband had just died or they had just done something horrible. So not a normal way of behaving. And it makes me think, what is she planning to do? What is she rehearsing? So she's pretending to talk to a grocery store worker. Let's find out why. She's just left. It wasn't 6 o'clock yet, and the lights were still on in the grocery shop. Hello, Sam, she said brightly, smiling at the man behind the counter. Why, good evening, Mrs. Maloney. How are you? I want some potatoes, please, Sam. Yes, and I think a can of peas. So she's saying the same thing she just was practicing. The man turned and reached up behind him on the shelf for the peas. Patrick's decided he's tired and doesn't want to eat out tonight, she told him. We usually go out on Thursdays, you know, and now he's caught me without any vegetables in the house. And how about meat, Mrs. Maloney? No, I've got meat, thanks. I got a nice leg of lamb from the freezer. Oh, I don't much like cooking it frozen, Sam, but I'm taking a chance on it this time. You think it'll be all right? Personally, the grocer said, I don't believe it makes any difference. You want these Idaho potatoes? Oh, yes, that'll be fine. 2 of those. Anything else? The grocer cocked his head on one side, looking at her pleasantly. How about afterwards? What are you going to give him for afterwards? Well, what would you suggest, Sam? The man glanced around his shop. How about a nice big slice of cheesecake? I know he likes that. Perfect, she said. He loves it. And when it was all wrapped up and she had paid, she put on her brightest smile and said, Thank you, Sam. Good night. Good night, Mrs. Maloney. Thank you. So think about what she's just done. She's just gone out, after rehearsing these lines, and told this guy that she is going to be making dinner for her husband. He's too tired to go out. She's doing what we would call creating a false alibi. So an alibi is something that would tell you where you were when the murder took place or who saw you. And this alibi would help you not be associated to the crime that was just committed. So if you can tell the police, oh no, I was at the grocery store when that happened, they can call, check with the grocer, check your behavior, check your mood, and determine whether or not everything checks out and you weren't connected to the crime. So if now the police were to call the grocer, he would have seen Mrs. Maloney there trying to buy food for her husband, acting pleasant and sweet and talking, about how tired he was. So now she has someone to vouch for her and who's seen her out in public. And now she told herself as she hurried back, all she was doing now, she was returning home to her husband and he was waiting for his supper, and she must cook it good and make it as tasty as possible because the poor man was tired. And if, when she entered the house, she happened to find anything unusual or tragic or terrible, then naturally it would be a shock and she'd become frantic with grief and horror. Mind you, she wasn't expecting to find anything. She was just going home with the vegetables. Mrs. Patrick Maloney was going home with the vegetables on Thursday evening to cook supper for her husband. So not only is she trying to create an alibi, she's also just trying to talk herself into believing that this is what's actually happened. She doesn't even want to try and act through this. She's truly trying to convince herself that this occurred. That's the way, she told herself. Do everything right and natural, keep things absolutely natural, and there'll be no need for any acting at all. So I think it's important that we make note that she is trying to convince herself that this scenario actually happened, that he was fine and she went out to the grocery store, and God forbid when she came home, something might have happened to him and she'd have no idea. Therefore, when she entered the kitchen by the back door, she was humming a little tune to herself and smiling. Patrick, she called, how are you, darling? She put the parcel down on the table and went through the living room, and when she saw him lying there on the floor with his legs doubled up and one arm twisted back underneath his body, it really was rather a shock. All the old love and longing for him welled up inside her, and she ran over to him, knelt down beside him, and began to cry her heart out. It was easy. No acting was necessary. So again, this kind of goes to prove that maybe Mary isn't just this crazy psycho killer. She clearly loved her husband, right? And she clearly is in distress about what she's done and how she's found him. So she doesn't need to pretend that she cares and she feels badly. That's all very clear. But again, what's done is done, and now she's trying to figure out how to get around it. A few minutes later, she got up and went to the phone. She knew the number of the police station, and when the man at the other end answered, she cried to him, Quick, come quick, Patrick's dead. Who's speaking? Mrs. Maloney, Mrs. Patrick Maloney. You mean Patrick Maloney's dead? I think so, she sobbed. He's lying on the floor and I think he's dead. Be right over, the man said. The car came very quickly, and when she opened the front door, 2 policemen walked in. She knew them both. She knew nearly all the men at the precinct, and she fell right into a chair. then went over to join the other one, who was called O'Malley, kneeling by the body. So her husband does work for the police station, which is why they know her and she knows them. And the precinct is just another name for a police station in that town or that district. So keep in mind that they know her and she knows him or them. Is he dead? She cried. I'm afraid he is. What happened? Briefly, she told her story about going out to the grocer and coming back to find him on the floor. While she was talking, crying and talking, Noonan discovered a small patch of congealed blood on the dead man's head. He showed it to O'Malley, who got up at once and hurried to the phone. Soon other men began to come into the house. First a doctor, then two detectives, one of whom she knew by name. Later, a police photographer arrived and took pictures, and a man who knew about fingerprints. There was a great deal of whispering and muttering beside the corpse, and the detectives kept asking her a lot of questions, but they always treated her kindly. I want to pause there and highlight that. And this is because her husband was a police officer. So again, they have a lot of compassion for her because they know her and they know him. She told her story again, this time right from the beginning, when Patrick had come in and she was sewing and he was tired, so tired he hadn't wanted to go out for supper. She told how she'd put the meat in the oven, it's there now cooking, and how she'd slipped out to the grocer for vegetables and come back to find him lying on the floor. Which grocer? One of the detectives asked. She told him, and he turned and whispered something to the other detective, who immediately went outside into the street. In 15 minutes, he was back with a page of notes, and there was more whispering, and through her sobbing, she heard a few of the whispered phrases. Acted quite normal, very cheerful, wanted to give him a good supper, peas, cheesecake, impossible that she. So here's where they check out her alibi. And what is funny about this is that idea of dramatic irony we've talked about, where we as readers know what Mary has done to Patrick and with her alibi. But the police have no idea. So that dramatic irony where we know as readers what Mary has done, but the other characters have no idea. So it kind of adds suspense to thinking about, okay, is she going to get caught? And a little bit of humor. I mean, in this case, it's dark humor, but a little bit of thinking like she is getting away with all of this right now. Because sure enough, her alibi did check out. He reported back that she was normal, happy, just wanted to give him a good supper. So everything's working out how she wanted it to. So keep thinking about dramatic irony because it's popped up a few times already and it will continue on, especially with this last section. After a while, the photographer and the doctor departed, and the two other men came in and took the corpse away on a stretcher. Then the fingerprint man went away. The two detectives remained, and so did the two policemen. They were exceptionally nice to her, and Jack Noonan asked if she would rather go somewhere else. To her sister's house, perhaps, but to his own wife who would take care of her and put her up for the night. No, she said she didn't feel like she could move even a yard at the moment. Would they mind awfully if she just stayed where she was until she felt better? She didn't feel too good at the moment. She really didn't. Then hadn't she better lie down in the bed? Jack Noonan asked. No, she said she'd like to stay right here where she was, in this chair. A little later, perhaps, when she felt better, she would move. So think about why she wants to stay there. She probably is upset, but she also wants to keep an eye on what's going on because, again, she knows that she's guilty and they're still trying to piece everything together. So they left her there while they went about their business, searching the house. Occasionally, one of the detectives asked her another question. Sometimes Jack Noonan spoke at her gently as he passed by. Her husband, he told her, had been killed by a blow on the back of his head, administered with a heavy blunt instrument, almost certainly a large piece of metal. We know as readers that it's not metal, right? Think about what we know and what they know, what they think it is. They were looking for the weapon. The murderer may have taken it with him, but on the other hand, he may have thrown it away or hidden it somewhere on the premises. It's the old story, he said. Get the weapon and you've got the man. Later, one of the detectives came up and sat beside her. Did she know, he asked, if anything in the house that could have been used as a weapon? Would she mind having a look around to see if anything was missing? A very big spanner, for example, or a heavy metal vase? So a spanner is a tool, like a wrench, a big metal tool. They didn't have any metal vases, she said, or a big spanner. She didn't think they had a big spanner, but there might be some things like that in the garage. The search went on. She knew that they were the other policemen in the garden all around the house. She could hear their footsteps on the gravel outside, and sometimes she saw a flash of a torch through a chink in the curtains. It began to get late, nearly 9, she noticed by the clock on the mantel. The foreman searching the room seemed to be growing wary, a trifle exasperated. So wary means tired or showing tiredness or feelings of kind of being checked out. And exasperated, we can infer by those feelings of tiredness, kind of mean they're getting frustrated, a little bit frantic. So they still aren't very sure. They think they know what the weapon is, but they haven't been able to find the weapon. And they've even said once they get the weapon, they can get the killer. So think about what we know and where the weapon is. Jack, she said the next time Sergeant Noonan went by, would you mind giving me a drink? Sure, I'll give you a drink. You mean this whiskey? Yes, please, but just a small one. It might make me feel better. He handed her the glass. Why don't you have one yourself? She said. You must be awfully tired. Please do. You've been very good to me. Well, he answered, it's not strictly allowed, but I might take a drop just to keep me going. One by one, the others came in and were persuaded to take a little nip of whiskey. They stood around rather awkwardly with the drinks in their hands, uncomfortable in her presence, trying to say consoling things to her. Sergeant Noonan wandered into the kitchen, came out quickly, and said, Look, Mrs. Maloney, you know that oven of yours is still on in there and the meat is still inside. Oh, dear me, she cried, so it is. I better turn it off for you, hadn't I? Will you do that, Jack? Thank you so much. When the sergeant returned the second time, she looked at him with large, dark, tearful eyes. Jack Noonan, she said. Yes. Would you do me a small favor, you and these others? We can try, Mrs. Maloney. Well, she said, here you all are, and good friends of dear Patrick's too, helping to catch the man who killed him. You must be terribly hungry by now because it's long past your supper time, and I know Patrick would never forgive me, God bless his soul, if I allowed you to remain in his house without offering you decent hospitality. Why don't you eat that lamb that's up in the oven? It'll be cooked just right by now. Wouldn't dream of it, Sergeant Noonan said. Please, she begged, please eat it. Personally, I couldn't touch a thing, certainly not what's been in the house when he was here. But it's all right for you. It'd be a favor to me if you'd eat it up. Then you can go on with your work again afterwards. So think about what she's trying to do here. This is another example of dramatic irony. So be careful with this one. It's not verbal because she actually does quite literally mean it would be a favor to her. But do they know why this would be that type of favor? Because what is she wanting them to do? There was a good deal of hesitating among the 4 policemen, but they were clearly hungry, and in the end, they were persuaded to go into the kitchen and help themselves. The woman stayed where she was, listening to them speaking among themselves, their voices thick and sloppy because their mouths were full of meat. Have some more, Charlie? No, better not finish it. She wants us to finish it, she said. Be doing her a favor. Okay then, give me some more. That's a hell of a big club the guy must have used to hit poor Patrick, one of them was saying. The doc says his skull was smashed to pieces just like from a sledgehammer. That's why it ought to be easy to find. Exactly what I say. Whoever done it, they're not going to be carrying a thing like that around with them longer than they need. One of them belched. Personally, I think it's right here on the premises. Probably right under our very noses. What do you think, Jack? And in the other room, Mary Maloney began to giggle. So again, think about how that ending leaves us not only viewing Mary, but what we know versus what the characters know. So this assignment I want you to use, or the story I want you to use to work on the assignment on Teams, that is titled Lamb to the Slaughter Analysis Questions, or Irony and Analysis Questions. So there will be another video that goes over the first part of the assignment on irony, but you'll be responsible for answering some of the comprehension questions about the text, as well as some analysis questions about point of view, theme, main idea, morals, where is it? And that information. So it's called Lamb to the Slaughter, Irony and Analysis Questions. So use the story for that. And there will be more videos posted on the irony section of this assignment, as well as where to access the video on Edpuzzle to watch and compare to the text version.